Chapter 30. Peace in the Desert. When the Muslims were settled back in Medina after their success at Khaybar, they had reason to feel much safer and much stronger. The two enemies which represented the greatest sources of danger to the Muslim community in Medina, the Quraysh and the Jews, were now neutralized. A third source of danger existed which represented a continuous threat, the Bedouin Arabs. Everywhere in the Arabian Peninsula, there were Bedouin tribes, large and small, which led a life based on aggression and looting. They did not recognize any law apart from that of the desert. Agreements, treaties, and alliances counted for little. Whenever a chance of gain presented itself, treaties and friendship were thrown to the dogs, and the friends of yesterday became the enemies of today. The victor always treated the vanquished with ruthlessness and contempt. Many Bedouin tribes did not like the rise of the Muslim state in Medina. They recognized that a totally new order was about to prevail in Arabia if the steady progress and increased strength of the Muslim state were allowed to continue. Hence, they were always planning to launch raids and attacks on Medina. Their most immediate concern was not to allow the Muslims to settle in peace. The Prophet's prime objective, however, was that the Muslims should be free to convey the message of Islam all over Arabia and to the world at large. For this to happen, peace and security must be established. People must feel free to adopt Islam if they were convinced of its truth. The Prophet had long ago adopted a policy based on the principle that attack was the best form of defense. He was not to change that sound policy now when he faced only those terrorist tribes and concentrations of Bedouin Arabs who wanted to preserve lawlessness in Arabia. Therefore, successive expeditions were mounted during the next few months against anyone who thought of attacking the Muslims or causing them any trouble. In the month of Shaban, 3 such expeditions were mounted. The first was led by Umar ibn al-Khattab and included about 30 horsemen. Their aim was one of the clans of Hawazin. Although Umar moved only by night, those people of Hawazin received intelligence of his approach and fled. When Umar arrived at their place, he found no one around. He therefore started on his journey back home. His guide asked him whether, having missed his target, he wished to attack a group of Khattam who were traveling in the area. Umar told him that the Prophet did not order him to attack anyone other than Hawazin. Hence, he left them alone. This is only one example of the fact that the Muslims attacked only those Bedouins who intended or plotted to cause them some harm. People who wished to live in peace were given the chance to do so. The second expedition was led by Abu Bakr, who traveled eastwards to Najd, where his target was the tribe of Fazara. He was able to take them by surprise, killing a number of their men and taking a number of prisoners. Abu Bakr's own share of the spoils of war included a pretty maid. The Prophet asked him to give him the maid as a present, and he did so. The Prophet then sent her to the people of Makkah in return for the release of a number of Muslim prisoners. The third expedition was led by Bashir ibn Sa'd from the Ansar, who marched at the head of 30 men towards the people of Murrah near Fadak, the Jewish township in the north of Arabia, which entered into a peace agreement with the Muslims shortly after the Battle of Khaybar. He managed to take a herd of cattle which belonged to the Murrah people and went back towards Medina. The people of Murrah, however, pursued them and were able to catch up with them at nightfall. There was a battle of arrows in which the Muslims were not as well armed as their opponents. When their supply of arrows was exhausted and some of them were injured, the others tried to escape because they were heavily outnumbered. Bashir, the commander, fought very well, but the people of Murrah were able to regain their cattle. Bashir was injured, but he was able to walk with difficulty. He managed to reach the Jewish township where he stayed until his injuries healed. He then returned to Medina. Many other expeditions were sent to places all over Arabia, some of them deep into the desert. The purpose was to achieve security so that emissaries from the Prophet to the various tribes could come and go in peace and security to explain the message of Islam to the people. This is the task which the Prophet and the Muslims wanted to accomplish. Any obstacle which prevented them from fulfilling this duty of theirs was to be removed without hesitation. Whatever means were necessary for its removal were to be employed. Hence, these expeditions, which were highly professional and disciplined, were sent out. They abided by the Prophet's instructions as he gave them. They were not looting raids, for the Muslims would not unjustifiably take anybody's property. They did not care for anything other than conveying God's message to people. We've already mentioned that Umar did not wish to interfere with any people other than those who were identified to him by the Prophet as troublemakers. An example of the discipline which was the mark of these expeditions may be given by relating what happened to a man who was instructed to gather intelligence for his commander, Ghalib ibn Abdullah, during his expedition to attack the people of the Mulawwa in a place called Al-Qadid. He says that they arrived there before sunset. In order to learn what the people were doing, he climbed a hill which overlooked their dwellings. He lay down at the top of the hill when the sun was just about to set. A man came out of his home and saw him in his position at the top of the hill. He said to his wife, "I see something black on the top of the hill which I did not notice earlier on. Maybe the dogs have pulled some garment or something up there. Look around you and find out if anything is missing." She confirmed that everything was in its place. Then the man asked her to hand him his bow and a couple of arrows. He took the first arrow and shot it and was able to hit the Muslim man at the top of the hill in his side. The man took the arrow out and remained in his place. He then aimed the second arrow and hit the Muslim in the shoulder. Again, the Muslim did not move, apart from pulling the arrow out. The man said to his wife, "Both my arrows have hit that thing. Had it been a man gathering intelligence, he would have moved. We have nothing to worry about. In the morning, go up there and fetch my arrows." Here is a man who has been hit twice, yet he prefers to suffer the pain rather than alert hostile people to the presence of his companions. With such an attitude, the Muslims could rely on God's help, for God helps only those who demonstrate their willingness to sacrifice whatever is needed for His cause. What took place in that expedition afterwards is sufficient to show how the Muslims were helped by God. The same man reports, "We waited until all activity in their quarters died down. We then launched our raid, killed a number of their men, and took their cattle and started our journey back home. Soon they managed to raise help and came after us in hot pursuit. Our pursuers heavily outnumbered us, and we were certainly no match for them. We moved as fast as we could, but they were soon catching up with us. When only a short distance in the lower part of the valley separated us, God sent from wherever He willed fast floods. We had not seen any rain previously, but the flood water ran so fast that no one dared make an attempt to cross to our side. That gave us a chance to evade our chasers, and we managed to reach home with everything we had." These were only examples of the expeditions which the Prophet sent out to every corner of Arabia where trouble was brewing. The forces sent on these expeditions varied from 30 to 500 men. The size of each force was determined by the task in hand. All of them, however, demonstrated the same degree of discipline and seriousness, so that in a few months, all the routes of Arabia were safe for the Muslim preachers to go about and visit the various tribes and towns, calling on them to accept Islam. They were able to explain the message of Islam without fear of being attacked. This was the goal, and it was achieved when the Muslims employed the necessary means for combating tribal terrorism, which was the order of the day in Arabia. The Muslims viewed themselves as trustees of the message of Islam. Their task was to convey it to people. When they had explained its principles and showed that it worked for the benefit of man and for the achievement of human happiness, their task ended there. They were not supposed, nor did they try, to compel people to accept Islam. Conversion by compulsion is alien to the nature of Islam. People, however, are normally not prepared to listen to a new call or a new theory, let alone a new religion, if they live in fear or if they are threatened by different powers. Hence, security was absolutely necessary for the fulfillment of the Prophet's and the Muslims' task of making the message of Islam known to people far and wide. Security was also necessary to ensure that anyone who adopted Islam in any tribe was safe from internal persecution. This is another example of the practicality and realism of Islam. It faces every situation with appropriate measures. But the neutralization of the Quraysh and Jewish fronts gave the Muslims prospects other than spreading the message of Islam in Arabia. One has to remember that Islam is a universal message which God addresses to all mankind. People other than the Arabs had to be informed of it. Hence, it was only natural in those years when the Muslim state was safe from immediate hostilities that the Muslims should give their advocacy efforts a broader outlook.